appreciate you being here. I am going to do my best to give you some really practical tools tonight for supporting your children as they may be feeling stressed and anxious. I'm going to share my screen in a couple of moments. I do want to tell you, first of all, my presentations tend to be pretty interactive. So if you are able, I'm going to be asking questions. I would love for you to respond in the chat box. I'm going to be doing it throughout the presentation. And you can always, as everyone probably knows Zoom by now, but you can send me a direct message if you don't want your response to be seen by everybody. So again, I'll be interacting with you. And then we have lots of time tonight, which I'm very excited about because I will be able to answer your questions directly. So we have an hour and a half blocked off. I will definitely not be speaking for that long. My guess is I'll be speaking for the first maybe 40, 45 minutes. And then any questions you have related to this topic or really anything parenting related, I will be able to answer. And I'm excited for that part as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the topic and then about me, and then we are going to jump in. So we are going to be talking tonight about supporting anxious children. I will tell you that before COVID, I was asked to speak about this. And I do speak a lot in Fairfax County and Loudoun County, many counties surrounding. So I speak at schools all the time. And I was asked to speak about this topic so often before the pandemic, but you can imagine during the pandemic and afterwards, this has become such an important topic because there's even more anxiety than ever. If there wasn't before, there's even more than ever in our kids and in us as well as parents. So tonight I'm going to give you, like I said, some practical tips for how you can support your child. I will tell you this presentation focuses mostly on what you can do as a parent to support your child. I don't specifically talk about how to help your child deal with their own anxiety, because that actually takes a lot longer. And I can certainly answer questions about that at the end. But I really wanted to give you a presentation that you can take with you and start using right away. Like tonight, you could start using some of these strategies and they would be effective. Teaching kids how to deal with their own anxiety obviously is a little bit harder. It takes a little bit longer, but these are things you can start to do right away. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. And as I'm doing this, if you don't mind putting in the chat box the ages of your children. So how old are your kids? Obviously, you have elementary school kids, but you may have other kids, you may have multiple children. So what are the ages of your children? I'll be looking at the chat as I'm telling you a little bit about myself. So I am, most importantly to me, a mom of two. I have two daughters who are 10 and 12 years old. So they're in 4th and 7th grades. And so just so you know, I'm reading these as they're coming in. So just because I don't say it out loud doesn't mean I'm not reading them. I am. So I'm seeing like an age range right now so far of 3 to 14. Which is great. So we're going to be talking about things that help younger kids, elementary school kids, adolescents. This is perfect. Okay, so my kids are 10 and 12, just like someone just said as well. In addition to being a mom, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. I have a certification actually in a number of different parenting paradigms. And I've been in the field of psychology for about 18 years now. The first part of my career, I worked directly with children and adolescents. I was an ADHD and academic coach. So I was helping kids and teens who were diagnosed with ADHD, but also those who weren't, who were just struggling in school. And then I was also an in-home mentor, which means I was going into people's homes to help with the family dynamics. And I was trained as a psychotherapist. And although I saw kids and adults as a psychotherapist, my main group that I was helping was adolescents. So that's really when I was a therapist, that's what I was doing. But maybe about 13 years ago now, I realized that even though I was working with kids and teens at the time, working with parents would actually help me have a bigger impact on the home. So I stopped working with kids and teens, again, about 13 years ago now, and I've been working with parents ever since. And I love doing it because it really does, when I help you, it helps the entire family. So I teach you what I used to teach teens, but I also support you as a parent. My clinical interest has always been in resilience and self-esteem. So even though most parents come to me with some sort of behavior issue, my kids aren't listening, or they aren't going to sleep when they're supposed to, or a mood issue, my kids are anxious or they're sensitive, they're not resilient. Even though they're really coming to me with things that they see, I'm always giving strategies that are going to foster resilience and healthy self-esteem in kids. And you'll definitely hear that tonight. However, these days, what I really focus on is helping parents who have children with what I call big emotions. So I'm actually going to ask you a question now. What I mean by big emotions is your child may be anxious, maybe they're sensitive, maybe they're strong-willed, Maybe they have big reactions. So I would love to ask you the question. Say yes if you have a child, based on the way I'm describing it, they have big emotions. You can say no if they don't, but tell me yes if you have a child who has big emotions. Again, they're strong-willed, maybe they're sensitive and get really, yeah, lots of yeses, absolutely. And it's funny because I get interviewed all the time on this topic, raising kids with big emotions, and people have yes, yes, yes. People always say to me, how do you know if your child has big emotions? I'm like, honestly, if you have a child with big emotions, you know. I have two of my kids. Yeah, someone else just said two of them. My kids both have big emotions. One of them is sort of loud with her emotions. She's more of the strong-willed type, and my other one is a little bit more sensitive. She's very, very critical of herself, and she's very sensitive to any type of what she perceives as criticism. Some of you may relate to that. So that's really what I specialize in, is helping parents of kids with big emotions. I do have a podcast. I do these trainings all the time. And I also have a program for raising kids with big emotions. So many of you are going to be able to relate very, very closely to these strategies because they really do obviously help kids with big emotions. All right. So I have another question for you. Since we're talking about supporting kids with anxiety, or supporting anxious children, what is it that causes anxiety in your children? If you don't mind putting in the chat. So is it new situations? Is it situations with friends? Is it academic issues? Is it COVID, worried that they're going to get sick? So what is it that causes anxiety in your children? I'm going to wait to see all of the above. Yes. And what's interesting is that I personally myself have a little bit of anxiety. I work really hard on managing my symptoms, but I have anxiety. And I can tell you, as an anxious person, like once you have it, you can have it about a lot of things. So friends, academics, change, the unknown. That's a huge one. New kids, new situations, what other people think of her. Absolutely. I know a lot of kids had trouble going back to school after COVID. That was such a new unknown, even though some of them had been in school before. That was a really, really hard, a really tough time because it was new. It was change after they'd been home for so long. Speaking in public, making mistakes. That's one of my daughters as well. She gets really upset if she makes mistakes. Absolutely. New responsibilities. So again, this idea of new things, of change, of different, this can cause a lot of anxiety. Absolutely. So you can keep posting if you're typing, don't stop, but I'm going to move on. And I'm going to tell you that, yeah, mistakes is a big one. Absolutely. I'm going to tell you that it's actually not these things that cause anxiety. It's not the mistakes or the unknown or the academics or the change. It's not the thing that we're facing that causes anxiety. It's actually how we think about and interpret what we're facing. And the example I always use here is if you think about John Glenn, who many of you know was the first American to orbit the Earth. And I don't know about you, but I can't think of much more anxiety provoking than like orbiting the Earth. You're in outer space alone. You don't know if you're going to die at any moment. What's interesting about John Glenn is that his heart rate when he was orbiting the Earth for the first time never went above that of an average man walking on Earth. So very stressful, potentially, situation. And he actually wasn't anxious about it. They did a lot of training with him to help him think about and interpret that situation differently so that he wasn't anxious while he was there. So it's not the situation themselves. It's how we think about it and interpret it. And it's more specifically a belief that something bad is going to happen and we can't handle it. That's really what anxiety is. It's this fear that something is going to happen and we can't handle it. So for example, a child who's worried about a test may be thinking, I'm not going to pass that test, then my parents will be on my case, and I don't want to deal with that. So it's not the test itself necessarily, it's what's going to happen if I don't pass it. Or another example, if you have a child who gets really annoyed or angry or anxious when you ask them to get off of their video game to come to the dinner table, I actually do a whole presentation on that. But one of the reasons they could be getting upset about that is they may be thinking my friends will all be playing that video game. And when I have to get off to go eat dinner, I'll fall behind. And then they'll all be talking about it. And I can't handle that. Or their scores will get higher and mine won't. And I can't handle that. That could be what they're thinking. Another example, I won't know who to sit with at lunch. It'll be awkward and I don't want to deal with that, or I won't know how to handle it. So many of you said the unknown. I want to talk about that one too. The unknown is I don't know what's going to happen. So I don't know how to handle what I can't even predict. That's like the worst thing for the brain. The brain loves to be able to predict and know how to do something. That reduces anxiety. This is why the unknown is such a trigger. Although, again, some people will say, I'm doing something new and I'm excited about it. The unknown does not cause anxiety in everybody, which by definition, then it doesn't have to cause anxiety. It's how we think about it. And what's really interesting is that this was such a mind-blowing thing to me. I have a brother who's extremely successful. He has this really high power. He's actually the CEO of a really big company. And when he started his job, I called him and I said, hey, how's it been? Is it really stressful? It's a public company. First time he's been CEO of a public company. I was like, is it stressful? And he's like, yeah, Rach, it's stressful, but that's what I love. And to me, when I asked him a question, I assumed that stress equals bad. But he loves stress. He looks for stress. That's actually what pumps him up enough to keep going. So again, it's the interpretation and it varies. So the unknown is not stressful for everybody. So it's not objectively stressful. All right, let's keep moving. So I want to explain what is going on in the brain when we are anxious and why we tend to get stuck in anxiety. So first you need to know, this is a very primitive picture of the brain, obviously. First, what you need to know is that there is a part of the brain that allows us to not be anxious. This is the part of the brain that allows us to think rationally. So I'll just use, someone just said fear of starting middle school next year. That's a perfect one. I've gone through this with my own daughter. So I know that my own highly anxious daughter, I know what this is like. So let's use that example, fear of starting middle school next year. This part of the brain, it's this front part of the brain right here. It's called the prefrontal cortex. It allows us to think through things rationally. So this part of the brain for a child going into middle school would say, hey, you know what? You're going to a new school, but you've been to new schools before. You've been fine. It's not a big deal. This part of the brain allows us to solve problems. So if we're going into middle school, this part of the brain would say, okay, you know what? You might not know who to sit with at lunch, but you can look for all the kids you know, or you can bring a book just in case you don't know anyone. This part of the brain allows us to solve problems so that we're not so worried. This part of the brain allows us to think things through and see the big picture, realizing, you know what, you might be nervous on the first day of middle school, but you will get through it in 2 or 3 days. It's not the end of the world. The big picture is there are a lot of situations you're going to go through. This is the prefrontal cortex. We all want our kids to be thinking with this part of the brain. We all want ourselves to be thinking with this part of the brain. Now, first thing you need to know about this part of the brain is that it does not fully develop until the mid-20s. So I saw the ages of your kids. Your kids are not in their mid-20s yet. And that doesn't mean we can't teach our kids to do this. It just means it's not natural. We're actually resisting the way their brains are wired when we are trying to help them see things differently. So we have this part of the brain that's rational, that thinks things through. However, when we have those thoughts that I was just mentioning, remember the thought is, I can't handle middle school, or I don't know who I'm going to sit with, or this new job is going to be stressful, or the unknown is scary because I don't know what's going to happen. I can't make plans. I can't predict. These thoughts create a threat in our mind. And what happens is when our brain senses a threat, and those come from our thoughts. Remember, someone else might have the thought, oh, a new school. I'm so excited. New people. That'll be awesome. That thought will not create a threat. But most anxious people, or who have the potential to be anxious, will be thinking, oh my gosh, middle school, I won't know anyone. It's going to be awful. I'm not going to have any friends. Everybody else is going to make friends. I'm not going to. These thoughts create a threat, and that threat turns on an alarm in our brain. And that alarm is our fight or flight response. And one of the first things our fight or flight response does is it shuts off our access to the parts of the brain or body that it feels are unnecessary for survival, because that's what the fight or flight response does, right? It helps us survive. But we actually, our brain, our fight or flight response doesn't differentiate going to middle school or going to the unknown or having a hard test. It doesn't differentiate that from a true life-threatening situation. Still has the same response. Shuts off parts of the brain or body that aren't necessary for survival. So it shuts off that our access to that prefrontal cortex. So we're not thinking rationally. When someone is in a state of anxiety, and we try, in fact, I have another yes or no question. Have you noticed that if your child is anxious at that moment, they're anxious about a test or doing something new or not being able to make friends, have you noticed, say yes if you've noticed this, that when you speak to them rationally, it does not help? Does not help. Say yes if you've noticed, does not help. That's because, yeah, I'm seeing the yeses, they're in fight or flight. And the fight or flight response does not respond to rational language. It does not. It is not in that moment open to new perspectives. In fact, what happens when we're in fight or flight is we look for all of the evidence that we are right. So if your child is worried about something that they don't know what's going to happen, let's say they're going to on a new soccer team. They don't know anyone, they don't know the coach, it's all the unknown. When they're in that spot and we say to them, yeah, but you know what, you've been on other soccer teams, you're a good soccer player. What the brain does in that moment is it looks for all of the evidence that they should be scared. Yes, you may have played soccer before, but you don't know this coach. Maybe all the skills you learned from your last coach won't work with this coach. So that's where their brain goes. It looks for all of the evidence, and it does this to keep us safe, but it doesn't really keep us safe. It actually keeps us stuck. It prevents us from meeting our potential, because what happens is if this child goes to this unknown soccer practice, then they're nervous. They can't access that prefrontal cortex. They tend not to play as well. And then they have all this evidence that they're right. And the next time they'll say, see, I didn't play that well. So the fight or flight response really does keep us stuck, unfortunately. So I do want to mention something now that you know a little bit about the science, that anxiety or a lack of resilience, lack of ability to handle anxiety doesn't always look like worry though. And I'm going to ask you another yes, no question. Have you seen this in your child? As we're talking about anxiety, it might appear a little bit different. It's not always a child saying, I'm worried about a new soccer team. I'm worried about this. It may be that you see the fight part of the fight or flight response. So instead of being worried, they get angry. They become aggressive. So my older daughter does this. She's my highly anxious child. Yeah, I'm seeing the yeses come through. Say yes if you relate to this, keep typing. Where she actually becomes really mean when she's anxious. So if we're running late, she gets really mean, especially to her younger sister. She's like, why are you taking so long? That's actually her anxiety, but it's turned out in the fight part of fight or flight. So I just want you to know, often anger, aggression, disrespect, often when we ask our kids, did you do their homework? And they say, get off my back. It may be because their homework, having so much homework creates anxiety. And that's actually what you're seeing. It's overwhelming for them. And so they become disrespectful. May also be the flight part of fight or flight. So they're not saying, I'm worried about this homework assignment or I'm worried about this. They just shut down or they avoid the thing. Has anybody noticed the avoidance? Say yes if you've seen that. They avoid the thing they don't want to do. So maybe they avoid trying new things because they don't like the feeling of not being good at something. This tends to be the more sensitive child. They don't want to try something because the feeling that they get when they're not good at it creates anxiety or discomfort in them. So I just want you to know it doesn't always look like worry. It may also be fight or flight, the anger, aggression, disrespect, or the avoidance. All right, now that you kind of have a foundation of what anxiety is, why it's happening, I want to talk about what doesn't work before I get to what does work. So I'm actually going to ask you this. What have you tried to do when your child is feeling anxious that does not work? A lot of these things are going to make sense, like you'd think they'd work, but they don't, which is really frustrating. We want them to work, but they don't. So what have you tried that does not work? Just going to wait for the responses. Otherwise, I have a ton that since I've been doing this talk for so long, I know other parents say. Saying calm down. That's a really good one. There's a quote that I heard many years ago and I've used it ever since. And I want you all to hear this. So if you're typing, stop typing to listen to this because this is a good quote. Never in the history of humans calming down has the phrase calm down ever calmed anyone down. The phrase calm down. So both of you said that, yeah. Saying calm down, saying take a deep breath, those do not work. Others that you'd think might work, yelling, threatening, taking things away, it does not work. And it's like, great, well, now we have no tools in our toolbox because all the things we try don't work. Other things, and I'm going to see people type these as well. We're going to come up with other ones. Actually, I'm going to wait one more minute because I have a slide on this and I just want to see if anyone else is typing some of the things I'm going to say on the slide. Hugs. I know you'd think that hugs would work. You'd think, oh, I'm going to calm you down. And for a lot of kids, if I actually get close to my anxious child, she gets really, really angry. She does not want to be hugged in that moment. That's true. And it's funny because I think I'm like this too. When I'm really upset, I actually don't want to be hugged either. So I can kind of relate to that. But it's hard because as parents, we want to hug them. All right. So if you're still typing, go ahead and type. But I do also want to talk about some other things that do not work. And I want to tell you why they don't work. And then I'm going to shift to what does work. So I'm going to take away everything and then I'll give you back some new tools. All right. Reassurance does not work. Reassurance doesn't work because as human beings, we're survival-based creatures. And so our brain is wired not to trust other people, but to get evidence for ourselves that something is safe. That's probably what kept our ancestors alive. They're not going to just trust someone that is safe. They need to try. And so here's the example, the more modern example I always give everybody. When you first learned to drive, you were probably totally petrified. The first, I don't know, 10 times you got in a car driving, very petrified. First time you got on 495 was probably a horrible experience. I grew up in New Jersey and we have traffic circles. I remember being so scared to go on those traffic circles. So driving at first is really scary. At this point, you probably don't even think about it when you get in the car and drive, when you go on 495. I don't think about it when I go home and visit my family in New Jersey. I go through those traffic circles, no problem at all. But what's interesting is, statistically speaking, driving is actually pretty dangerous. It is dangerous, but your brain has so much evidence that you're going to get in that car and you're going to get to your place and then you're going to get home that it doesn't think about it anymore. So even though driving is actually pretty dangerous, our brains have gotten so much evidence that it's not, that we're not anxious about it. That's what I mean by that. So it's not reassurance, it's evidence that we need. Logic is another one that most parents, when I ask what doesn't work, a lot of people come up with that. Logic does not work. So if your child is worried about a test, or worried about, let me use making friends, because I think I used a test. They're worried about making friends. And if you say to them, you know what, you've made friends before, remember all the friends you made in this grade, or if you just do this and I'll give you a strategy, it will work and you'll be able to make friends. Using that type of logic does not work, because remember I said we're survival-based creatures. So danger is programmed to override logic. What's interesting is when we're in fight or flight, we notice danger, but we shut off our ability to process logic. There's lots of tests that show that. Danger overrides logic. So you can't speak to your child logically. It does not work. That's why I was asking you a little bit before. You've noticed that already. The other thing that does not work, and this is hard for me because, as I said, I have some anxiety myself, is our anxiety does not help our children. Our anxiety makes our kids' emotions, their anxiety much bigger. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to what do you do about all of this. So most of us, we may not even be aware that we're anxious. Most of us don't know how to help the fact that we're anxious, but I will tell you, this is something you'll probably need to work on if you have a child with anxiety. All right, so I'm going to start to, now that I've, again, taken away everything you know how to do, I'm going to start to rebuild your toolbox. And I'm going to teach you two ways you can support your child. The first is something you can do proactively to reduce the likelihood that they are going to become anxious to begin with. This is something that when I was a therapist, I used all the time with the kids that I worked with. And like 80% of the kids I worked with had some form of anxiety. I taught them this tool all the time. I use this tool, and my daughter, both of my kids have said this is really, really helpful for them. So I'm going to teach you a proactive tool that reduces anxiety to begin with. And then I'm going to wrap up tonight with a strategy that you can use in the moment when your child is feeling anxious in order to support them. So let's start with this proactive tool. I'm a big believer actually in proactive parenting, because once someone's in fight or flight, it's kind of hard to get through to them. So I love this. I love being proactive. And here is the proactive strategy. It is to teach your child to solve problems. So I want to actually, before I even put that first line, another yes or no question. If you have a child with anxiety, which you probably do, otherwise you wouldn't be here, have you noticed that their brain can find a problem in anything? That they can find a problem even in fun things? Say yes if you've noticed this. You can say no if you haven't. Their brain can find a problem going to a birthday party. Yes, lots of yeses. Their brain can find a problem, going to an amusement park. Things you think were fun, they can create problems. And that's what the anxious brain is programmed to do. The anxious brain, remember, is thinking at its core, I can't handle it. Something's going to happen and I can't handle it. So the anxious brain says, I need to find all the problems before they happen so that I can handle it. So we'll find all the problems to keep us safe. Doesn't really keep us safe, but that's what it thinks it's doing. So sometimes we need to thank our brain. Thank you for trying. It's not helping, but it will find problems anywhere. So what we want to do for our kids is to help them stop seeing problems as problems, to help them realize that if you see a challenge or an obstacle or a problem, it's not really a problem. It's not a threat. It is not something that has to turn on your fight or flight response. Remember, if you remember that picture, the fight or flight response is what prevents us from using our rational thought and our problem solving. We want to show them that problems are not problems. And this is how you do this. We're basically reducing the threat of whatever situation they're facing. And there are lots of ways to do this. I love teaching this to kids because it's actually really fun. So So I'm going to give you lots of ways, and I'm going to actually give you younger children and older children as well. But one main way you can do this is to ask questions like, what do you need and what's the solution? So let me give you some context here. What we tend to do as parents is we solve problems for our kids. And I'm actually talking about everyday regular problems. So a child says, I'm hungry. We say, okay, there's a snack in the fridge, bottom drawer, there's some fruit. They say, I'm cold. Oh, okay, I'll turn up the heat. We solve problems for them. And what we need to do on a regular basis, not even with the things they're anxious about, we need to teach their brains how to solve those problems themselves. So 2 questions you can use to ask is, if they do say, I'm hungry, instead of say, okay, snacks in the fridge, say, oh, okay, what do you need? You can't ask this sarcastically. If you say, well, what do you need? You're hungry. What do you, that won't work very well. You want to ask this genuinely. And what this does is it teaches the brain, which they're not doing very much of, it teaches them to identify what they need and ask for it, which is a very anxiety reducing skill. A cousin to this is, what's the solution? This is actually really good if you have kids who fight a lot. One of your kids comes up to you and says, they're annoying me. You can say, oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. What do you think is the solution? So you're actually becoming very solution focused. Now, I'm going to tell you, when you first ask this question, first 10, 15 times, they're not going to know, because if they knew, they wouldn't be complaining. They don't know the solution yet. What we're doing is we're starting with this question, and I'm going to tell you what to do about the fact that they don't know, but you're creating more of a problem-solving home, so they realize they can solve problems, and problems are not problems. So what do you do before they know how to answer this? You actually do what I call teaching the language of problem solving. So the language of problem solving is something like this. And I've taught this to hundreds and hundreds of kids when I was a therapist. I've taught this to my own kids. Solutions, because remember you said, what's the solution? Solutions start with, can I please or can you please? And what's interesting is that these 2 phrases solve 98% of interpersonal problems. So if your child is nervous to talk to their teacher, they're nervous about making friends, they're nervous because someone on the soccer field isn't passing them the ball. When they say, if you say to them, what's the solution? They say, I don't know. And you say, remember, solutions start with, can I please or can you please? Now they know if they go up to the teacher, they can say, can you please help me with this problem? Or going up to a friend, can I please play with that? Can I please say that? Or asking someone to pass them the ball, can you please pass me that? We're basically giving them the language which they do not have. That's why they're anxious. They don't know how to solve these problems. We're teaching them how. And I'm going to give you a little tip. I taught all these things before I was a parent, but once I became a parent, I realized this. Your kids aren't going to want to answer this question all the time. My kids get really annoyed if I ask them this question. So they're kind of motivated not to complain, because they know I'm going to say, oh, what's the solution? And guess what? It reduces complaints tremendously, because they know that's what I'm going to say, and they don't want me to ask that. So it actually does, really, because they get annoyed. I'm being honest, because they get annoyed. And let me ask you another question. Might your child get annoyed with this question if you ask it over and over? Say yes if your child might. That's not a bad thing. I want to hear yes. I'm seeing some private yeses in there too. Yes, absolutely. Yes, that there will be eye rolling. Exactly that. And I don't mean to be mean. I'm actually a big advocate for children, but that's kind of what you want. You want them to start solving their problems so that they're not relying on you to do it. All right, keep going with this. I'm going to give you 2 more ways to address problem solving, and then I'll move on. All right, another way to deal with problem solving is to have them solve your problems. Now, I don't care how old your child is. They don't necessarily want you to tell them what to do. They want to tell you what to do. So a really good way to have them practice problem solving is to have them solve your problems. And especially, I'll give you younger and I'll give you older. Younger, actually, what I would say for younger kids with have them solve your problems is you can make this really fun. So up to about age 8 or 9, what you can do is and we used to do this with my kids a lot. When we were at the dinner table, we would come up with fun problems to solve that were like not real problems, like you land on Mars and you have to make it back to the ship, but your air is leaking and you only have 30 seconds. What can you do to go back to the ship? How many solutions can we come up with for this problem? So it's not like who has the best solution or who can come up with the fastest solution. It's how many solutions can we come up with? Because what we want to teach them is anytime you see a problem, there are multiple solutions. So having them solve your problems with younger kids can be really fun. Older kids, they're not going to do well with that. What I would say with older kids is that you want to actually have them like overhear a real problem that you have. Make it age appropriate, obviously. But like I used to, as my kids got older, I would do something like, oh my gosh, I double booked myself today. I actually booked 2 clients in one spot and I've tried a paper calendar, but it doesn't work. You know, what else do you think I could do? when they get to be the advice giver, they're much more likely to be involved with something like this. So having them solve your problems is another way. Last way to help them with problem solving is just to recognize when they do solve problems. This actually, when you recognize it, it gives them a little bit of a dopamine hit, and it teaches their brain, problem solving is good. So a couple ways to do this. I'm going to go younger and older again. Younger kids, if they do solve a problem, which they're going to be doing because you're going to be using these strategies, what you want to do is, again, kind of get excited by it. When my kids were younger, we would use this thing where if someone solved a problem, we would use their initials and the letters PS for problem solver. So if I solved a problem, it would be RBPS because I'm Rachel Bailey, and my kids would say RBPS. Or if my husband solved a problem, his name is Dwayne, it would be Dwayne DBPS. So we would like celebrate it. We would do this with our kids too. So it became like a cool thing. Younger kids like this, older kids do not. It became a cool thing to solve problems. What do you do with older kids? I'm actually going to give you a tip with older kids. So like 8, 9 and above, this actually comes from a workshop I do on how to talk to adolescents. I'm going to give you this piece of advice, which is that if you have an adolescent, your emotions can't be bigger than theirs. So if they solve a problem, you don't want to say, you solved that problem, way to go. If they solve a problem, here's what you want to do. You want to walk up to them casually and say, hey, I noticed you solved that problem. That was cool. I don't know that I would have come up with that solution. Then you zip your lips and you walk away. Subtle is better with adolescents. So just recognize it. Don't make a big deal out of it. Walk away. They're much more likely to internalize that. All right. So we have now talked about problem solving. And again, I want you to help prime their brain to see that problems are not problems. That changes their thought pattern, which reduces a lot of anxiety. All right, lots of other tips on this, but that was the one that's really easy to use. The last thing I want to talk about tonight is what you can do to support your child if they're actually in a moment of anxiety. If they're in it and you know that logic won't work, you know that reassurance won't work, what do you do instead? And this is a 2-step tool that you're going to do in the moment. In order to teach you this tool, I have to teach you about something that I call the yuck curve. The yuck curve is this rainbow-shaped curve over right here that you see in front of you. And it represents what happens when someone is in what I call yuck, a state of yuck. Now, yuck is a term I use to describe anything uncomfortable. So yuck could be anxiety, it could be anger, it could be disappointment, any uncomfortable feeling I call yuck. But for sake of tonight, we're going to assume that the yuck that we're talking about is anxiety. So this represents what happens to someone when they're in yuck. When they're feeling anxious. So let's say your child realizes that they have to study they have a test tomorrow that they're not prepared for. So they're feeling anxious. What happens is when they realize they're not prepared, they start off with small anxiety, but their anxiety gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's when they're thinking the thoughts, oh my gosh, I'm not prepared. I'm not going to get a good grade. Then I'm going to have to show my parents this grade. I'm going to get punished. I'm not going to be able to go to my friend's party this weekend. That is what's happening when they're actually feeling anxious. All of these thoughts are making them more and more anxious. Eventually, the anxiety reaches a peak and it comes down. It does come down. I used to teach an undergraduate college course called The Physiology of Emotions. And I won't bore you with all the details, but what I will tell you is that I know for a fact that emotions do not last forever. If your child is in constant yuck, that's actually kind of another situation, but they will eventually come down. And what we need to know is that when someone is actually in this place of yuck, I call this the yuck zone. This is where they're doing something. They're in yuck and they're either coping in a healthy way, which is what we want, although that's the thing that takes a while to teach our children, or they're not really coping in a healthy way. They're just thinking these thoughts, they're spiraling. But you really need to know that when they're on this curve, they're in the yuck zone, and chances are they're not coping in a healthy way. You also need to know that when they're on that curve, they will not respond to the rational thought, to the logic, to the reassurance. They don't have the ability to access rational thoughts, an open mind, problem-solving skills until they have traveled the curve. They can access that part of the brain before they're anxious. And once they've traveled the curve, that's when they can hear you again. But when they're on the curve, they cannot hear you. That's when we try to use logic. We yell at them, we punish them, we threaten to take things away. Nothing works because they're in fight or flight. And all that really does is it makes it worse. Because I know the question obviously is, okay, how do we get them through the curve more quickly? If that's when they can be more rational and we can talk to them about solutions, how do we get them through more quickly? Well, what we usually do keeps them stuck for longer. because when they perceive a threat, when they are in yuck, and a threat to them would be us reassuring them. Let me tell you again why reassurance doesn't work. Basically, the brain needs evidence. So when we're reassuring them, your child, if you're saying you're going to be fine when you go to middle school, or you're going to be fine when you go to this new thing that you don't know very well. When we say this, our children don't say, that's right, I'm going to be fine. What our children think in that moment is they don't get it. My mom or dad, they don't get how bad it is. Maybe they were fine in middle school. I'm not going to be fine in middle school. So what we do is we're just increasing the threat because obviously, because they're interpreting what we're saying very honestly as we just don't get it, which is a huge threat to children if we don't get it. So what makes it worse is a threat. What ultimately brings someone out of a state of anxiety is where their brain senses that they're safe and time. Just because they're sensing that they're safe, and I'll tell you how to help them feel safe in a moment. Just because they're sensing they're safe, though, they don't immediately snap out of it. The fight or flight response is a physiological response that occurs in the body. So it takes them a little while to snap out of it. So you can't just, help them feel safe and then they're like, oh, now I'm better. It does take a little while. So this yuck curve is really important to understand, to know how to support someone who's actually in any type of yuck. This could be anger, disappointment, frustration. You can use this in any situation. Just know when someone's on the yuck curve, not much you do is going to help. Most of what you do is going to create more of a threat. All right, so what do we do about this? The first step in helping someone through anxiety is to help them travel the curve. So this is just what you just saw. This is nothing new. This is the yuck curve. First step is to do what is called being the second chicken. So I'm going to explain what I mean by this, but this is a really good story that actually doesn't come from me. It comes from a book called The Opposite of Worry by Lawrence Cohen. It's a great book, more for younger children though than older children, because it's a play-based way to help kids with anxiety. But in his book, he starts the book with a story, a true story. When he was in like 8th grade, he did a science experiment where he was testing the stress response of baby chicks, like those little cute little yellow chicks hopping around. And what he was testing was he would notice that if he put his face up to a baby chick, then it would get stressed. Obviously, a baby chick sees this huge human face. And the way its stress response was to lie down and play dead. So what he was doing was he was noting the amount of time that this baby chick would stay in this stress response, how long it would be lying down and playing dead. So he noted the time, and then he actually did this with 2 chicks. And he noticed when he had 2 chicks who were both lying down and playing dead, one of them would inevitably open up their eye. And when it saw the other chick was still lying down and playing dead, it remained lying down longer. And he concluded that it was laying down and playing dead because it realized if the other chick was still laying down, there was probably still a threat out there. If the other chick was still in its stress response, there was probably still a threat out there. And just to wrap up this story, because I think it's kind of cute, the chick that he found that had been playing dead the longest, he had put a mirror up to it so it saw itself when it opened up its eye, and it thought there was a stressor out there, and eventually did hop back up though when it realized there was no stressor. So all of this is to say, you are the second chicken. I am the second chicken. I don't love this as a parent, but it is true. Our children are looking to us to see if there's a true threat. And this is how we teach them to get off of the yuck curve or not. If we are anxious, if we are angry, if we are frustrated, if we are judgmental, if we are controlling them, all of these things are telling them that there must still be a threat because it's bad. So let's say you have a child who's nervous about middle school and you're saying, but don't worry, you're going to be fine. I mean, look at it. And you're like trying really hard to get them out of their feelings. They sense that as a threat because very honestly, that's coming from our own anxiety. That's coming from our feeling of, I don't like my child being anxious. I need to reduce this feeling for them. I'm going to do that by solving this problem. Makes them more anxious. So we need to be a second chicken, and we need to, and I'm actually I meant to change this word. I've changed it in other versions of this. The word I use here is calm, but I don't mean calm. What I actually mean is we need to regulate ourselves. And the reason I'm making that distinction is because I don't mean that you pretend that you think that everything's going to be okay. You need to genuinely believe that everything is going to be okay. Calm implies that you're kind of calm, you're not really yelling, you're not getting upset, but you may be on the inside, you may be really anxious or angry. What I mean is you are genuinely regulated, because for better or worse, when someone is in an anxious state, they sense you. They feel your energy and they will pick up on whether you are regulated or not. So we need to do the same thing for ourselves. Remember, I was talking about the fact that anxiety is caused by our thoughts. We have to notice our own thoughts. We have to believe that whatever they're going through, we can handle it. So if a child is nervous about something new, they're nervous about the unknown, you need to genuinely believe that it's okay that they're nervous about it. Not, I have to fix this. I have to, be able to give them the best answer. I know there were a lot of talks, especially after tragedies that happen. There's so many tragedies that happen. Or after the pandemic, parents were saying, well, what can I say to make my child feel better? As soon as you're anxious about trying to find the right thing, that anxiety is contagious. What you need to realize is you don't have to say the right thing. What you actually need to do is work on yourself. You have to believe, I can handle this. It's okay if my child is anxious. Whatever happens, we will be okay. Going through a global pandemic, I don't know when the pandemic is going to be over, but I know we'll get through it together. Going through awful tragedies like we do that happen in our society. You know what? These are awful tragedies. I'm not sure what the solution is, but I know that we are in this here and we are safe right now. All of these things are what calm a child down. Basically, what you're doing though in those moments is you're not saying very much. It's your energy that your child senses. So if they are saying to you, I'm nervous about this test. I'm worried about talking to a friend. I'm worried about being on my new soccer team because I'm the star player and everyone will be watching me. I'm worried about what other people think. If they're saying that to you, you're not trying to reassure them or make them feel better. You're listening. You may ask a couple of questions like, what is that like? Or what makes you nervous? That's not agreeing with them. A lot of parents will worry that I'm agreeing, it really is bad. In fact, I will encourage you to say, wow, that does sound scary, because then they know you get it. You're just saying a few words to show that you get it, but you know you can handle it, and they'll sense whether you believe that or not. So notice your energy. It's really more about your energy than your words. You're not saying very much. When they're done, or even if they're not saying anything, so when they're done, you can say, thank you for telling me. If they're not saying anything, don't worry about it. Just sit there. They're not thinking, my parent isn't saying anything, or even if they are, if your child is saying, why aren't you saying anything? What you could say is, you know what? I don't really have anything right now that's going to make you feel better. I'm just going to sit here with you. That's it. So you don't have to fix it or solve it. You need to let them travel the curve. So that's the first step. The second and last step is, once they've traveled the curve, you want to empower your child with anxiety to find their own solutions. So you're still in the moment. You're still having this conversation. They're still worried about what people think. They're still worried about the test, about people watching them, the unknown, whatever it is. They're still worried about that. You've now let them kind of release their yuck. And this will happen naturally. I promise you this. The body is actually set up to release yuck by traveling the curve. That's what's supposed to happen. We usually just stop it. We stop it from happening because we're anxious. They will release it. Then you empower them. Now, this is something you've seen before. It's just what we just went through. You're being the second chicken. You're showing them that this is handleable, that you get it. Then what you do, once they have traveled the curve, and you can tell that they've traveled, I'll tell you how. Their speech tends to slow down. They, instead of saying, oh my God, I have this test and I don't know, they tend to slow down. Their body language changes. Instead of being tense, their shoulders tend to come down a little bit. They relax a little bit more. That's how you know they're no longer in this heightened state of anxiety. Once they have traveled the curve naturally, because you've let them, then we empower our children to find their own solutions. One of the worst things that you can do, and this is so hard for me, one of the worst things you can do, though, is to give your child solutions. If you have an anxious child, one of the worst things you can do is give them solutions. Because let's say they're worried about, a friend. They're worried that this friend hasn't really talked to them lately and they don't know what to do about it, or maybe someone's been mean to them. Let's say you gave them the most amazing solution. You said, okay, this is what you say to your friend. Let's say that solution worked. And so they come home from school and they're like, yeah, it worked. You're high-fiving. You're really excited. What you've taught them is that they need you to be able to handle those situations. And then they're going to be anxious when you're not around. So we need to empower them. This is one of the reasons I focused on problem solving before, because if you're doing this outside of the moment with regular everyday problems, this becomes a lot easier when they are anxious. Okay, so what does this look like and sound like? First thing you want to think about is when they do come off of the curve, to empower them, let them feel in control. So what I would say to a child once they're feeling less anxious is, well, first of all, actually, before I even do that one, I would say, have you thought of any ways to handle this? Do you have any solutions? Chances are they're going to say no, because that's why they're anxious, but give them the benefit of the doubt. Ask them, have you thought about what you might want to do? Or even, do you want to do something about this? That's a very empowering question. Do you want to do something about it? Have you thought about it? These are very empowering questions because they can say yes or they can say no. By the way, if you say to a child, do you want to work on this? Do you want to do something about it? And they say no, they weren't going to listen to you anyway. So you've saved your breath. So let them tell you yes or no. The next thing you want to do though is, let's say they've said yes. That means they're open to suggestions. Say, can I offer a suggestion? Same thing. If they say no, they weren't going to listen anyway. If they say yes, it's one more indication that they're actually open to suggestions. So what you would say is, okay, this is how you, by the way, empower a child without giving them the solution. You would say something like, okay, this is called giving them ownership. So you would say, here's what I would do if my friend were being mean to me, but what do you need to do to change my suggestion to make it work for you? So you're giving them a suggestion. Maybe your suggestion is, well, I would go up to that friend and say, hey, are you mad at me? That's your suggestion, but you're saying to your child, my suggestion is to go up to them and ask them if they're mad. But do you think that's going to work for you? Or you can say, I haven't been 8 years old in a while, or 16 years old, however old your child is, or 12 years old. Does that work anymore? I don't even know what works these days. So you're actually empowering them. You're giving them ownership over this. One of the things I also used to do as a therapist, and you don't have to do this if you find it disrespectful, but it is very powerful. I would say to mostly adolescents, like I said I was working with, I would say, I'm going to give you a suggestion, but you can tell me how stupid mine is. But every time you tell me how stupid mine is, you need to give me something else. And they love to tell me how stupid my suggestions were. And I was in my 20s at the time, so I was even close to their age, and they still wanted to tell me I was stupid. So let them tell you why they don't like yours, as long as they give you another one. You're giving them ownership. Ultimately, you're letting them come up with their own solutions. So empowering them is about letting them feel in control, asking them if they want to talk about this, asking them if they want a solution, and then giving them ownership over the actual solution. So I'm going to wrap us up. We have plenty of time for questions. So glad to see that. But I do want to wrap up with 2 things. So start to think about your questions for me about this. I know towards the end, I was doing a lot of talking. So if you have any questions about any part of this or anything related to raising kids, I will be able to help. Let me wrap up though and tell you how you can get some other resources from me. So ultimately, what we want to do is, we want to teach them how to think about things differently. Remember, this all comes from their thoughts. Remember, John Glenn was all in his head. He was not anxious. Instead of them thinking it's going to be bad and I can't handle it, we're teaching them, I can handle this because I can handle discomfort. Remember, when we let them travel the curve, we've taught them that they can handle discomfort. I've experienced this before. I will be okay. They're learning. I know problems aren't a problem. I know how to solve problems. This is not a problem. I will be okay. This is the opposite of anxiety. So when parents do say to me, how do I teach kids to help themselves through anxiety? It starts with us. It starts with us teaching them how to solve problems. It starts with us showing them that they can handle discomfort. This is how we reduce anxiety. All right. What we want to do is then, to support an anxious child, instead of reassuring them, show them that you can handle it. That is so much more powerful than just reassuring them. Instead of fixing the problem, empower them. Proactively, you do this through teaching problem-solving skills, and then in the moment, you're the second chicken, stay regulated, and empower them instead of solving for them. All right, so I'm going to get to questions, so you can start typing if you have questions, but I do want to let you know other resources I have for you. If you are raising a child with big emotions, you can absolutely sign up. I have this free video series where I talk about why most things we try with kids with big emotions don't work and what to do instead. You can find that on my website, rachel-bailey.com/long game. That's free. All of these things here are free. Also, if you want to be on my email list, if you're not already, although I haven't spoken, to most of you already, so you're probably not on my email list, you can just email, and you can do this right now, actually, just come on back for the questions. info@rachel-bailey.com. You can put in the subject line tips. You don't have to say anything in the body of the email. That's my team's email address. They will put you on my email list. So you'll start getting tips from me. I do weekly tips, videos, my podcast episode. You can also just listen to my podcast. It's called Your Parenting Long Game, or Your Parenting Long Game Podcast Community. So these are all the ways that I can support you. I will keep this up for a few more minutes, but in a couple minutes, I am going to stop sharing so that I can see people more easily, or I'm not looking at my own screen. All right, so questions about any of this? I don't see questions so far, but I'm gonna wait and see if anyone is typing. Someone just sent me a really quick private one. I won't obviously say the name, but someone asked, what if you have your own anxiety as a parent? Very good question. And I will say that I have anxiety, like I said, myself, and we do need to work on strategies ourselves because our kids do sense our anxiety. So I have lots of strategies on my podcast for this. I have talked about this a lot, but yes, this is something we do have to work on. It's really hard to get around this. We also want to model for our kids what it looks like. So we do need to work on this a little bit ourselves. All right. So first question I see here that is not private. How do you de-escalate a kid quickly? My son has a lot of anxiety about doctor and shots, and I want to be able to help him calm down, but we have a limited appointment time. Okay, here's what I will say about this, because I get asked this question almost immediately every time I ask this. I do have every time I talk about this, I have a podcast episode on this too. What if you don't have time to travel the curve, or how do you de-escalate quickly? I'm going to tell you something. You can't. I'm going to be honest. What you can do though, so that's the bad news. You can't de-escalate quickly. It's not, I wish we could, but this is biology. It's like saying, how can you stay in the air for longer than gravity will allow you to? It doesn't happen. But here's the good news. You can prepare a child. So their yuck curve is less long and less intense. But in the moment, once a child is in it, they will de-escalate quickly based on a number of things that are not something you necessarily do. They will de-escalate quickly if they have their own coping mechanisms. They can de-escalate themselves quickly. They will de-escalate quickly if they don't have a lot of yuck built up inside. And they will de-escalate quickly. The quicker you are not getting sucked in, the quicker they will de-escalate. So what I usually say about things like shots is we're doing this proactively. Two things you're doing proactively. First is preparation. What the shot is going to feel, what the shot is going to be like, not necessarily feel like, because that might make them more anxious, but what's going to happen. First, the nurse is going to take you into the room. Then they're going to put alcohol on you. Then they're going to count down from 3. The more preparation, the better. The other thing I would do when you're preparing is actually do a little role play where they are the doctor or nurse giving the shot and you are the patient. Believe it or not, when they're in the role, in a very similar role as the powerful person, that actually helps them relieve some of their stress. You're giving them control in a way that they don't have control in that moment, and that can really help with preparation. So ahead of time, you're teaching them what it's going to be like. The other thing you're doing ahead of time is to teach them what I call a when-then statement. So this is beginning the topic of how we help our kids calm down. But basically what you're doing is you're teaching them, when I feel anxious, or, I mean, this is a big process. I'll give you the very high level. When I feel anxious, you might have them name their feelings. You might teach them to name their feelings, but when I feel anxious, then I will blank. And you're actually going to help them find something to focus on that teaches them that they're safe. This could be a variety of things that they do, but they need that when-then statement to know what to do in the moment. So you're going to teach them how to handle these feelings, and you're going to practice it with them many, many times before the shot. So they know, when I feel these feelings in my stomach, I feel the butterflies in my belly. When I feel them, they're not a problem. I know exactly what to do with them. However, you can't do any of this in the moment. By the time they're already on the yuck curve, and you want to de-escalate it fast, I know, but by the time they're already on it and you say, hey, remember what you do with the butterflies in the belly? Your child won't respond to that. They need to be able to do it on their own. So again, long answer short, there's nothing you can do to de-escalate quickly. It's really based on what the child is going through, how much yuck they have, whether they have coping skills. So what you want to do ahead of time is prepare for that. That's really the best way to get through that quickly. Sorry for that there's no magic pill for that, but there unfortunately isn't. All right, when I ask about solutions, they're resistant to answer and don't want to make the effort. Okay, so here are a couple of things, what I will say, because I hear this all the time. I told you this, I was a therapist for adolescents. They don't want to talk about this stuff either. So I have lots of ways around this. So a couple of reasons they don't want to talk about it. Number one, it's boring. They don't want to talk about this stuff. It doesn't interest them whatsoever. So just keep that in mind. When you do have these conversations, it can't be this long drawn out conversations. These conversations are quick. The other things to think about when they don't want to talk about it is they may genuinely not know what the answer is, and then they feel stupid. And then they're saying, I really don't know. And then it makes them feel worse, and that puts them into yuck. So what I would do before you ask them for solutions, well, you can say, do you have any solutions? And if they're resistant at all, that's where you say, can I offer some solutions to you? Remember, the solutions you give are short and sweet. You're going to say, here's one. What do you think about it? So you're not boring them. You're also offering some suggestions and solutions. The other thing I would do about that is, I don't know how old your child is, but outside of the moment, do some of those problem solving scenarios and strategies that I mentioned, because it's easier to do them in the day-to-day than it is to do them in these conversations. And lastly, if they do nothing, they refuse to talk, which happens, it totally happens, especially with older kids, they just refuse to talk. What you want to do is actually model this. What you want to do going forward, because it's not in your control whether they actually have these conversations or not. It's in your control though to model it. So you come home at the end of a day and you say, guess what happened to me? Here was the problem. Here's how I solved it. So all you need to do is model it and do more of the outside of the moment. So just remember, if they're not participating, it could be because it's boring. It could be because they don't know, which makes them feel worse. It could be because it brings up some sort of shame or discomfort that they don't want to address. In those cases, if they're really resistant, you do it on your own. And that's all that's in your control, but that's okay. That works. It's like if a child doesn't want to learn a foreign language, which really this is to them, it's a foreign language, but you're speaking that language around them, they're going to learn it. They're going to start to hear it and it will become internalized. All right. What should I do if she is stressed about a test and she's heading to the bus and there isn't time? Yeah, so very similar. There isn't time to let her come down from the yuck curve. So basically, what I will say is I'm not a big believer that we want to do so much in the moment to let them to kind of address the yuck curve. We want to do so much more proactively. And I would love to really help parents just work on the proactive piece because it's much more effective. But if I did a talk like this and I didn't tell you what to do in the moment, you'd be very frustrated. So I think when we have anxious kids, we need to spend about 15 to 20% of our time in the moment. We need to spend about 80 to 85% of our time in doing more of the proactive things. Because I wish there were like, here's what you do when the child is on the yuck curve. What I actually say in my podcast episode, so you can go listen to it for more detail, is if you don't have time to let a child travel the yuck curve, just know that it's not going to go well. It's just not going to go well. There's no way around that. You can try to distract them. I will tell you, and I have an episode on this, a separate episode on this too. That one is called, Should You Distract a Child? You can try to distract them and it may work temporarily. But what happens when there's anxiety is that even a temporary solution, the anxiety is going to come back. If the problem is not solved, the anxiety is going to come back. The other thing is when we distract our kids, it just kind of makes those feelings go underground. They don't go away. So if you want to do a temporary distraction, you can, but it's like, especially with she's going on the bus, you may distract her for like 10 minutes. You may say, okay, when you're on the bus, name all the characters in your favorite show. And that will distract her for a little while. But then as soon as she's done, she's going to go right back to thinking about it. So there's no quick fix. The better fix is to do a lot of this proactively and reduce the anxiety to begin with. Okay. I'm glad that you enjoyed the advice. And you're welcome for the resources. I'm happy to do this. This is what I love doing. So I'm happy to do it. Okay. Do you have recommendations for therapists who work with children with anxiety disorders? There are a couple of centers in Northern Virginia and even in Maryland, but I'm going to be honest, I hate to say this, they're like all booked. You have wait lists for this. But I will tell you the Ross Center, which I believe is in McLean. They are a center that specializes in anxiety and they have multiple clinicians. And then the other one, oh man, I'm going to see if I can remember it. It's in Maryland and they're amazing, but they're really booked. Oh boy, the head of it I speak a lot at the Fairfax County Public Schools. They have a parent resource events, and there was a keynote speaker, and I cannot remember his name. I'm gonna have to get back to you all on that one. It's in Maryland and it's great. And they also focus on anxiety, but it's really, really hard. I have to be honest to get in there these days. I know a lot of people are coming to me because they have a hard time getting their kids in. So in the meantime, they help with supporting them the way they can. So I apologize for that. I'll try to find the name of the other center. It's in the moment, my mind can't think of it. Any tips for helping build my child's confidence to make potential new friends? He used to be very outgoing and social, and has recently started feeling shy and overwhelmed at playgrounds and large settings. Absolutely. So one of the things that, let me actually talk about self-esteem, because my answer will actually encompass both. Confidence and self-esteem, if you recall, it's actually one of my areas of expertise is on self-esteem. So there are two pieces of self-esteem, two components of self-esteem, and they will both play a role in my answer to you. First component of self-esteem, so you're getting other workshops tonight too. This is another workshop I do. First component of self-esteem is a genuine belief that we are enough as we are. Not we're enough if we're pretty enough or smart enough or whatever, but we're enough as we are. That's the first component. Second component of self-esteem and confidence is I can handle situations. I can rely on myself. I trust myself. I know what to do. So remember, genuine belief that we are worthy of acceptance as we are, and I believe in my capability. So when a child is feeling not confident, there are two things we need to do. First, we need to accept their feelings, very similar to what I was talking about tonight. So if a child says, I'm nervous about making new friends, or even they're avoidant, they may not even say I'm nervous. Remember, it doesn't always look like worry. They're avoidant. First thing you want to do with a child like that is just say something like, is it, kind of scary to go to make, to talk to new people? Let them have that feeling for a couple of moments. Don't jump right to problem solving, because just like I was saying before, we're letting them travel the curve. We're not jumping right to problem solving, because if you jump right to problem solving, first of all, your child is probably going to think, oh, they don't get it. They're telling me it's so easy to just make friends. They don't get it. It doesn't automatically make them feel better. So remember, we're accepting them where they are. That's a big confidence boost. They need to know it's okay to have their feelings. That's the first part. So ask them to talk about it. Be the second chicken, regulate yourself. Let them travel the curve. Let them be okay with that. Second tip is to teach them how to do this. So again, thinking back on that curve, and I'm actually going to stop sharing. Thinking back to that yuck curve, what you wanted to do at the bottom of the yuck curve is to empower them. So if a child is worried about going to playgrounds or large settings, first question is, do you want to do something about this? Do you want to talk about how you might approach children? If they say no, they're not ready to do it. If they say yes, you say, okay, do you have any ideas? They're probably going to say no. Then you say, can I offer a suggestion? You tell them your suggestion. You can go back to that, can I please, can you please play with me? Can I join you? But you also want to say, hey, does that suggestion work for you? Or do you want to try something else? And one of the things that you can do too is have them do an experiment. Have them come up with a few different solutions and try the different solutions. And you can have them make a hypothesis. Which one do you think is going to work better or worse? Have them try each one a few times and see which one works and which one doesn't. What that does is it shows their brain that even if something doesn't work the first time, there are other possibilities. It might work another time. So again, you're reducing the problem of a problem. So you're ultimately using the same thing to build confidence. You're letting them travel the curve. You're letting them have their feelings, and you're teaching them strategies to deal with the thing that they're scared of. One of the kryptonites of anxiety is a plan. When a child has or an adult, when we have a plan, anxiety decreases. So teaching a child how to make a plan, that's why I said with the shots, know how to deal with that feeling, know what's coming up. That decreases anxiety a lot. It's the opposite of the unknown, right? Remember, a lot of people said the unknown creates anxiety. The opposite of that is a plan. So we teach kids, but please, I encourage and urge all of you, do not go to the plan first. Going to the plan right away increases your child's anxiety. It doesn't make them feel better. It just makes them think they don't get how bad it is. I'm not allowed to have these feelings. It does not help to jump there first. Let your child have their feelings and then go to the plan. I know I'm a problem solver myself as well. I want to jump to that. Please don't do it. It's not going to do your child any favors. This is where our anxiety comes in. We want to solve the problem. We don't have to solve it immediately and that quickly. We need to regulate ourselves. We need to be okay that they're allowed to feel anxious. They're allowed to feel this feeling, because remember, if they experience this feeling, they'll realize I can handle discomfort. I can handle this feeling. This feeling does not control me. I can feel it and still take action. So I'm going to get off my soapbox because I'm not always good at this either. I can do this about 80% of the time. The other 20%, I go right to problem solving too, but it's really important for anxious kids that we don't go right there. All right. I find it fascinating after listening to you that my child who isn't often anxious is our best problem solver. I never put that together. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really a close connection between problem solving and anxiety. The ability to solve problems reduces anxiety. My husband is not a very anxious person. I'm the anxious one of the two of us. And I've always said to him, why are you not anxious? And he believes he's an introvert and kind of grew up knowing how to do things because he was depending on himself. And he's like, I just know that I can handle things. I'm like, that's why you're not anxious. I don't believe that. I had parents a lot like all of us. They protected me. They didn't want to see me upset. So I didn't have an opportunity to build a lot of resilience. So as an adult, it's really, really hard. So another reason we want our kids to experience these feelings, then we can teach them that they can take action to reduce them. All right, I don't see any more questions at the moment. So I think I'm going to hand it back over. I'm going to assume that all the questions were asked. And just one more time, say thank you all so much for being here. I'm so grateful for you taking your time.
Thank you, Rachel. I so appreciate you being with us this evening and for all the good advice that you offered and practical strategies. Thank you, families, for being here. I will save this recording and have our technology specialist posted on the website. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.